In today's video, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on the Yoeleo G21. What is it? How much does it cost? What's it like to ride? All of the who, what, when, hows, and whys. Now, I've been building and riding this for a few months now, so make sure you follow me on Instagram so you get to see these bikes as I'm building them up in real time. Okay, let's check it out. What's up everyone, China Cycling here, back with another video, back with another new bike build. Today we've got this, the Yoeleo G21, the updated version. Let's check it out. Now, long-time viewers of the channel will know I've been a paying Yoeleo customer for years, and my first Yoeleo video on this channel was also about 4 years ago. Now, obviously that came to an end when I started working for Windspace, but now that I've left Windspace, I thought it would be a good idea to catch up with Yoeleo and see what's new. So a brief history lesson for anyone who doesn't know, like Yoeleo were kind of like OG of the Chinese direct-to-consumer brands back in the day. Like back in the late 2010s, if you were looking for Chinese carbon wheels, most of the forums and stuff were all talking about Yoeleo as your go-to choice. Then after beginning with wheels, they kind of moved on to frames. The earlier frames were maybe molds they shared with their OEM customers or whatever. Nowadays they have their own design frames with their own private molds. Now the pandemic season was kind of like a double-edged sword for Yoeleo. So the double-edged sword was the good, that was that they got loads of popularity and loads of orders as kind of like Chinese bike things like exploded on the scene. But the negatives was obviously the logistics and the factory shutting down, and then also like the huge spike in demand that they just couldn't keep up. And so obviously I was working at Windspace, we were rivals to Yoeleo, so I was keeping an eye on what was going on for them. And yeah, like lots of forums and lots of YouTube video comments were full of people like complaining basically that they'd ordered a frame and they'd been told it was coming next week and then next month, and then yeah, months turned into a long time. I know Patrick Lino just put up a video the other day, a link in the description, talking about his experience and his friends' experiences. Like he had a couple of friends who waited like up to 9 months for their frames and then kind of just ended up cancelling their orders. Now Yoeleo took note of this, they took heed of this, and they kind of like hit the brakes and have hit the reset button. They're kind of going for a rebirth, like a Yoeleo 2.0 if you will, and there's a couple of parts for that rebirth. Like first of all, there's like their brand. They want people to more understand like who are Yoeleo as a brand and what do they stand for. The second part is that Yoeleo kind of like upgrading their service as well. They don't want to slip into the same nightmare as before where people are promised things that don't get delivered. So that's the second part. But the third part that I'm interested in is the upgrades to their products. Now Yoeleo have gone through all of their frames with a fine-tooth comb and really gone to town on the details. Now, for these Chinese brands, like details is one part where the brands usually suffer. Like for example, a bunch of frames won't come with an instruction manual, and you know, the accessories are just like thrown in a brown paper bag and tossed inside the box. Now, this frame here, the packaging was super on point. All the accessories were in nice little plastic boxes, and there was an instruction manual in there with the frame. So yeah, Yoeleo are really addressing these weaknesses with traditional Chinese brands. The attention to detail is crazy, like maybe even going higher than most big brands. For example, I'll give you one example. So usually the gap between your headset cover and the head tube of your bike, even big brands are guilty of this. Like sometimes you have a real ugly gap and you can even see the bearing through the gap, right? Now the reason for this gap is that different paint jobs have different paint thicknesses. So the brand has to leave enough thickness for the biggest paint job. Now, if you leave the thickness for a big paint job, but then the paint job is like a bare carbon paint job, there's going to be a huge gap in there. Now, Yoeleo have addressed this by including tiny little spaces that you can put in there to adjust the height of the headset cover. And you can adjust it down to like 0.5 millimeters. Nothing I've seen on another frame before, and I think it's a really cool feature. And as you can see, I've got the gap down on this to just a tiny hair's width, which means obviously gravel, you're riding it in the mud, you're riding it in the rain, it's fully internal cable routing, so it's a pain to change your headset, so you want the waterproofing around there to be as good as possible, and having that tiny gap is the best line of defense for your waterproofing of your headset. But anyway, there's a bunch of whole little details like this all over the frame, so let's have a look at more detail. Okay. So let's start over with what is this frame. So this is the Yoeleo G21 frame. I think they launched it in 2021, thus the name. But this is the refreshed version for 2023, and I've kind of gone to town on the details, which we'll go through. Now, first of all, this is an XXS. So previously there was no XXS or XXL. These are two sizes that have been added this year. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first XXS in the wild, so I'm pumped to get my hands on this. The frame is UCI approved, which again, I don't think any other Chinese gravel frame has right now. Obviously, gravel racing is becoming a thing. There are gravel world championships now, so having a UCI approved gravel frame is cool. For paint jobs, there are two stock paint jobs. There's this like ice crystal white color, and then there's like a khaki brown color to be all sandy and gravelly, I guess. I went for this one. It's kind of silver in person, but we'll see how it is out in the daylight. But yeah, very cool, like cracked ice effect that I think was made popular by Carl Nago. So let's go through the frame a bit. So let's start with geometry, because like I say, this is the new XXS version that didn't exist before, and I am pumped. Why am I pumped? So 4 years ago, again, I did a review on the R9 or the R11, I think, or something. It was the R9, and I loved that frame. I said it was good carbon, like good stiff frame, but the one thing I didn't like about it was the stack height was just too high. Now, if you check out this frame, wow, like this is the smallest head tube I think of any of my bikes, including my Alley Sprint. The head tube on this thing is crazy low. So if you want a gravel race bike, then this is for you. Obviously, if you want more of a relaxed gravel experience, then either just buy a bigger frame or put some more spacers underneath. But I'm building this up as like a gravel race bike for just tearing down the flats. I've got my Windspace G2 as kind of like my go anywhere gravel adventure bike, so I'm going to build this up as a gravel race bike, which obviously matches its UCI credentials and the whole integrated bar and stem thing that I'm going to have going on. Also talking about geometry, on here we've got clearance for 700 by 50C tires. Now again, the Windspace G2 in the extra small version, you can't put 700C tires in there. You have to use 650B. So obviously you get less rolling resistance with 700C, so I'm pretty stoked to be able to put 700C on this. How will the toe overlap be and stuff? Time will tell, we will see, but yeah, I'm pretty stoked that they managed to get that going. If you look down here, you've got like the dropped chainstay thing going on, and that's basically the secret that lets you have big tires and big chain rings. Chain ring size slips my mind. I'll put it down below for you to check. But yeah, so far, having not ridden it, the geometry seems super well thought out, and yeah, even a frame this small can put big tires and big chain rings on, so I'm pumped to try it out. Also tying into my build of what I want to do with this is more of like a flat gravel race bike. We've got an aero seat post here with like a camtail rear end. Even the seat tube looks pretty aero. The down tube, not bad. Again, it looks a bit of like a fat camtail profile. Obviously on the G2, you've just got more of a fat oval shape, which was never designed to be aero. So yeah, this is more of like a race-inspired gravel frame, let's say. Talking about racing and aero and stuff, at the front I've got Yoeleo's own integrated cockpit. So as with the frame, they use EPS plus latex technology on this. And what that basically does is the inside finish of the frame and the bar is super smooth. Even these holes that come out of the bar to put the cables in and out finished really well. So I guess you can have no trouble routing cables through there. I went for a 38 centimeter bar, I believe, and the stem is like 100 millimeters. Which good fit for me, and should let me get nice and low and aero. Yoeleo actually have two options for handlebars, so you can run it with this integrated handlebar, obviously fully internal cables, but they also have their split stem and handlebar combination, which you can also do fully internal, but just lets you run a bar and stem like separate if you want to be more picky about your angles and stuff. But I wanted those aero gains with the aero profile of this integrated bar, so that's what I went for. Moving down to the front fork, it's another place where Yoeleo give you a choice. So Yoeleo give you the choice of having holes for bottle mounts or no holes for bottle mounts. Again, the Windspace G2 comes with a whole bunch of mounts here, but some people think it's ugly. So here on the Yoeleo, you get the choice of having it with or without the mount holes. I went for without mount holes because, yeah, as I said, this is going to be my flat aero race bike. If I put a couple of bottles on here, I'm not racing anywhere. But speaking of bottles, still we've got, you know, two bottle mounts cages on the frame. On the bottom of the frame, it looks like we've got another mount for a bottle cage, but this one also has a a guard built into it, so a protection guard for the frame, stop you getting too many stone chips, or if you bottom out on something, should keep your frame a bit more protected. I can also see mounts for a pannier rack on the rear and fenders or mud guards depending on where you're from. Moving back to the seat post, one thing I forgot to say, this was another thing they've updated for this year. So now the whole seat post assembly can slide forwards and backwards, as well as your saddle being able to slide forwards and backwards. So a huge range of like adjustment here. If you're going to be doing like super long rides and basically set it up as like an aero bike with TT bars for those really long flat rides, then you can pull your saddle all the way forwards to get in a more TT kind of position. So that's cool to see, a lot of flexibility. Another small update for this year, and lots of people can relate to, so the bolt for adjusting the saddle height here, it used to be really close to the seat post, which meant if you're on the road with a multi-tool, you just couldn't get the tool into the bolt. So again, they listened to feedback and they've now moved that a few centimeters away. So now almost any tool you have should be able to get to that bolt. Like I say, it's these details that really separate the Chinese brands from the big brands usually, and it's good to see YOLO really going to town on these small details. Looking around elsewhere on the frame, like the brake mounts, the actual mounting points seem to have been cleared of any paint or whatever. We'll see how well and how flat the brakes mount on there when we get to it. Looking around at everything else, there's nothing really standing out for me. And yeah, just want to get it built up and see how we get on. Oh, one thing I did forget, we've got a T47 bottom bracket on here. Obviously a very modern standard and something that everyone's moving towards. So yeah, it's good to see Yoeleo going for that too. So let's have a quick run through of the bike. As usual, we'll start from the top. So I've got a Stella Italia SLR saddle up there, carbon rails, try to keep the weight down, etc, etc. At the front we've got the Yoeleo integrated gravel bar, so integrated bar and stem. It's got a flare out, but it also then flares back in. It's an interesting shape. Never quite seen anything like it. I didn't think it was going to be that comfortable, but no, it surprised me again. It was pretty comfortable. Obviously an aero-shaped bar, which ties into the whole this being a good race bike for the flat gravel kind of thing. So Yoeleo also did this with a separate bar and stem, as I've said before. For the group set, I built it with a L2 GRX. So 12-speed, 1x group set with hydraulic disc brakes. This thing has been flawless. I know some of you have been asking me about ERX, the electronic stuff. I'll do an update on that soon, but in my opinion, the L2 mechanical stuff at the moment is stable, it's worthy, dependable, you know, it's at that level. So yeah, you can buy this group set on Panda Podium as well. I've got 160mm rotors front and rear. So usually on my gravel bikes, I use 160 front and rear. On my road bikes, I use 140 front and rear because that's enough for me. Bottle cages, just slapped on 2 old Elite bottle cages on there. Wheels, again, they're the Yoeleo gravel wheels. But on them, I put the Maxxis Ramblers. So these are in 700 by 40C. In my opinion, they're a nice tire for like sandy-ish gravel that's nice and dry. Not too good for when it gets super wet and gnarly, but for most of your like loose pack or whatever, it's not bad. On the rear here, I've got like a 10 to 50 cassette. It's 12 speed. This thing, I got a super cheap one. It was about 40, 50 US dollars. So it weighs a ton. It weighs like 500 and something grams, so that's bringing up the weight of the overall bike by quite a lot. But I've been spending too much money on bikes these days, so I just wanted to cut some cost there. And the focus of this build isn't to be lightweight, so whatever, a few extra 100 grams there, save a whole bunch of money, seemed like a good idea. For the crankset, we've got the XKD aluminum crankset mixed with their spider-based power meter. So you all know I've been using XKD power meters for absolutely years. Also for sale on pandapodium.cc. It's a 24mm titanium spindle, I believe, which again keeps the weight down but keeps the stiffness up. Obviously the L2 group sets don't come with their own cranksets, so this is a good option to go with it in my opinion. Mounted onto that crankset and that spider is this deck-ass chainring. So this is a 46 tooth. So again, I said I'm building this bike up to be kind of like a flat kind of racer. So a 46-10 gives me about the same kind of ratio as like a 50-11 or whatever. So plenty enough top speed, but then the 4650 is also a more than 1:1 ratio for going up the steep hills if ever I want to give that a go. 2 of the chainring bolts are titanium and gold, and 2 of them are just silver. Don't ask me why. The cell are messed up, so that's what I got left with. Yeah, not really sure what else to talk about. I've got a bar bag up at the front, and again, that fits on fine despite having a super small head tube. If you're riding muddy gravel and stuff, I think a saddle bag gets a lot of mud thrown at it, so a bar bag might be better. But again, the aero is probably not as good as a saddle bag, so depends what you're riding on the day. But yeah, the brakes in this thing, it brakes super well, like 1 finger, 2 finger braking, easily enough. Shifting's been great. So fully internal cable routing with mechanical shifting isn't the best in the world. Occasionally I'll drop it down a gear and it takes an extra second or 2 of hesitation. But in general, it's been flawless. And yeah, personally, the overall aesthetic of the bike, I think looks pretty cool. So this paint job with the crystal effect is growing on me. And also you got like the kind of marbly random carbon layup in the wheels, which also gives you some texture for your eyes. So I feel you got this texture on the frame, texture on the wheels, and obviously the texture of the tread on the tires. I think it works quite well, but you guys let me know in the comments down below how you feel about the overall aesthetics of this build. Also, I think like XXS frames also look pretty ugly, but I think this one does a pretty good job of not looking too bad. I know GC Performance, he has the same color frame, but in a different size. So it'll be interesting to compare and contrast our 2 builds and see how similar or different they end up looking or whatever. So let's see how heavy it is. We've got the scales of truth. Let's have a quick look. Dun, 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 dun. Hook it under here, and 3, 2, 1. So what have we got on there? Let's have a look. 8.675. So around 8.7 kilos. Okay, last, let's check out the Freehub sound check. Let's get this spinning up to speed. Let's see how it sounds. 3, 2, 1. Boom. Okay, back inside now because outside is like 40 degrees Celsius or whatever, and I was melting, so time to enjoy the AC. Anyway, so how does the bike ride and what are my overall thoughts on the frame? So obviously I've seen a fair few frames in my days now, and usually when I just look at a frame, I start to have my own prejudice and misconceptions based on how the frame looks or whatever. So one of the things I was thinking about before I even rode the frame was I didn't think it was going to be too comfortable. One of the reasons for that was the D-shaped seat post and kind of the chunkiness of the seat stays at the back, and just how built up the whole rear end of the bike was. I didn't think it was going to be very compliant. I was pleasantly surprised. It rides a lot more comfortable than I thought it does. It's not like, you know, a super perfect riding on a cloud thing, but you know, it's not as bad as I thought. It rides well. Obviously on any bike, especially a gravel bike, most of your suspension is coming from the tires anyway, so any extra few percentage of compliance in the frame is neither here nor there. One thing I did like about the frame is the geometry. And again, this is one of those things where just pouring over the geometry chart, it wasn't necessarily obvious, but after riding it a few times, it's something that was. And so my experiences, obviously on this XXS frame, now I think there are like 7 sizes now, whatever, so your results may vary, but usually when you're on the bookends of the scale, either the super small side or the super tall side, you end up with a bike with like very compromised geometry. But I'm happy to say that it's not the case with the Yoeleo. So while this is the XXS, which is usually the mutant child of the family, the geometry on this seems pretty well thought out. So number one, the big one, is that there is no toe overlap on this frame. So even with huge 700C by 40C tires, I get no toe overlap on this frame. That's crazy. Like, one of the big reasons why shorter riders like 650B instead of 700C is because of the lack of toe overlap. So super cool to see that you can run 700C tires and you don't have to worry about getting any toe overlap here. I think harder than that is essentially by, you know, pushing the front wheel forwards with 2 ways. One, giving the frame kind of like a gooseneck thing going on at the top, and number 2, just the steer tube angle being super slack. And then when I started thinking about it, I was thinking, well, this super slack steer angle, like, is that going to have some negative effects? But no, like, this frame, especially on like long sweeping descents, This thing descends better than like my road bikes. The other day, I got a PR on a descent on this thing. There was a headwind and all that jazz, but just the confidence that this gives you on descents is crazy. So I think it's two things. Number one, the steer angle, and number two, the wheelbase. The wheelbase in this frame, in this size, seems pretty long. And yeah, this thing just descends like it is on rails. You can rail any corner, no problem. Like I said, I got a PR on this on a descent that I must have done like 50, 60 times on road bikes, and yeah, just mopped the floor with it. So yeah, the geometry on this is super impressive. So what about the pros and cons of this frame then? So the pros, I think, number one, it's a very like solidly built, well-built frame. You know, you've got your EPS plus latex technology in there. Yoeleo, they've been making frames for donkey's years now, so they know what they're doing. And now you have a 6-year warranty on the frame. So that's obviously showing they've got huge confidence in the frame and the carbon that's in it. Second main advantage I'll say is the geometry. Again, it's going to vary for you depending on what size you get, but I said it earlier, I'm very impressed with the geometry on this frame. The third pro I think on this, I think it's a great frame for like gravel racing. Now especially, so gravel is different things to different people and yada yada yada. I think more like in America, I think lots of gravel racing, it's pretty flat and you just want something that can really hulk on the flats. I think this is especially suited to that because, you know, the weight of the frame is not going to be a penalty as much on the flats, and also the more aggressive head tube setup is going to get you in a more aero position on the flats too. Obviously, the UCI certification, if you do want to go into the UCI Gravel World Championships, you've got your UCI certification for that. So yeah, so I think this is very good for like a race gravel frame. And then the fourth main advantage of this frame, I think, is kind of like the attention to details, and especially with things like the packaging and the accessories that you get as well. I talked about it earlier when I was doing the frame overview, but yeah, the attention to details in this frame are on point. But again, you guys don't come here for an advertisement, so we're going to say the cons with the pros. The cons on this frame, I'm going to say number one, this frame is not cheap. So what are we, like $1,590 for the frame set, including shipping. When you compare that to other Chinese brands out there, you're definitely at the top end of prices. Obviously, 10% discount, that will get down to about $1,430 give or take, which is more of a palatable taste, but still not a cheap frame. Obviously, you can go into the fact that this has UCI certification. I know this like cracked ice paint job is more expensive to make, yada yada yada, but at the end of the day, all consumers see is the price, and yeah, when you're at the $1,500 level, you're no longer a cheap frame. You get what you pay for, you guys be the judge, but just my opinion. The second disadvantage for me was on my model, the riv nuts got some rust. So you might be able to see in some of the B-roll, I got a little bit of rusting on the riv nuts. Now, I talked to Yoeleo about this, and they've said they've already fixed it for the future production frames. Basically what it was is when they make this cracked ice paint job, I think the whole frame has to be submerged in water at some point, or you know, there's lots of water on the frame or something, and that was basically causing the riv nuts to rust. Now it's only a little bit on there. Obviously you can use a rust remover and then put some like little grease between the nuts and the riv nuts in the future to stop it rusting. So not a deal breaker by any means, but just, you know, I've got to point out disadvantage with it, and that was a disadvantage that I saw. One other disadvantage I think is the frame weight. So like you're getting up to around 1,200 grams in this extra small size for a frame. Like again, it's gravel, weight isn't everything, but you know, you've got Specialized with their Crux with like 600-700 grams frames or whatever. So like the difference is a bit too much for me, but again, gravel, it's not all about weight, but you know, it's something to consider. So who do I think this frame is for? So if you're looking to build a fast kind of gravel race bike, I'd probably recommend this one for you. Like you can set it up, you know, super aero as far as gravel goes, and yeah, it looks like it'll munch up the miles. If you're after a super climby, like mountain goat kind of gravel bike, maybe there are other options out there that could be a bit lighter or whatever, but if weight's not your number one priority, and for most people on gravel, weight isn't your number one priority, I think this is a very good choice. If you are interested in picking one up, we stock them over on pandapodium.cc. Again, you guys know I've been working with YOLO for absolutely years, so when I came up with pandapodium.cc, they were a natural choice to put on the website. So if you have any more questions about this, you can either let me down in the comments down below, or head on over to pandapodium.cc and talk to me and my staff on the website over there, and we'll answer any questions that you have. Like I said, if you do want to pick one up, they're usually $1,590 there is a discount code in the description below, which will get you down to $1,431 I think it is. This has been an absolutely mammoth video to put together. I forgot how hard it was to make a complete bike build video. So thank you for sticking with me till the end. If you are still here, give us a thumbs up and maybe send this message to a few people if they're interested in a gravel bike. And yeah, subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this in the future. And China Cycling out.
Again, you're just gonna have to pick and choose through the footage. There's some gold here, but there's also some fucking shit. I'm gonna take that out the audio. In the outro, subscribe. Subscribe.